Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi and welcome to the ISO Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm delighted to welcome back Steve Mason, who is our managing consultant at Blackmores and a resident expert on all things information security. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you.
Great. Well, for those of you that have been listening to the last few episodes, you'll have had an overview of ISO 27002, the controls that support the new standard ISO 27001 for information security. And during the last episode, Steve started to take a deep dive into one of the new controls. So we're going to continue with that theme today, and we're going to be just breaking down a bit of information to provide you with a better understanding of one of those new controls, which is threat intelligence. So threat intelligence is A.5.7. So yeah, over to you, Steve. What's threat intelligence? What's the purpose of this?
Well, thank you, Mel, for that. Yes, I think threat intelligence, when we look at this new control, we think, oh, crikey, what's this going to lead to? But I think people need to just take a step back and realise they're probably doing this anyway. This is something that's been around for a long time, and really this is another example of the standard catching up with what we do normally within IT. And the purpose is to provide that awareness of the organisation's threat environment so that appropriate mitigation actions can be taken. Sometimes people call it event horizon. So you're looking at what's around you, what's on the horizon, what's coming in your direction that could possibly cause you some issues. And it's getting yourself ready in the business to make sure that things are right. So, and don't forget, if we go back into 27002, we've got those lovely bits in there about the control, the purpose, and the attributes and the sub-attributes. And again, that could be used as part of your auditing process. So you can go to your attributes, let's say cybersecurity concepts, and you could do an audit around identify, detect, and respond, just to see how good you are at this part of the standard.
So when you say that, this is an opportunity to look at the horizon and look at, potential threats, could this also feed into context of the organisation, for those organisations that have got other ISO standards, and we need to identify the internal and external issues and opportunities. So typically this is a SWOT analysis, isn't it, that many businesses do. Could this intelligence then be fed into that to help businesses?
It could be fed in, but I wouldn't say it's an upfront feed into that. It's probably something that comes later down the line. So it might be that you've already done your scope and context, and at the end of the year, you might look back at your threat intelligence and say, well, what have we learned from that? And does that actually broaden our scope and context of the organisation? Did we get it right in the first place? So that's how I'd be using this. I wouldn't be trying to do some sort of threat intelligence analysis at the beginning, because that may be a little bit long-winded for you to set your system up.
Okay, so threat intelligence sounds quite high level. Could you just break that down for us, please, Steve? What is threat intelligence? How would you describe it?
I would describe it as sort of knowing what's happening, perhaps not just around your business, but around the world, that could possibly come and affect your business in the way it works, and could affect information security in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I'll give you a very, very good example, and that is the pandemic. Now, people that were on the ball used threat intelligence to realise that the pandemic was spreading very, very quickly, and soon saw that as a threat to their organisations, to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so those that took action very, very quickly from that threat intelligence found that they recovered extremely well when we finally went into lockdown. The quickest organisation I came across took 24 hours to recover from the lockdown, whereas others were taking 3 or 4 weeks to recover from that lockdown because they hadn't made use of threat intelligence. So one thing to learn from this is that we mustn't run away with the idea that threat intelligence is just purely about IT and sort of viruses and things like that. It's about everything. It's about the whole world that could come and stop your business, stop your IT from working.
would you say, though, that I think it's good to think more broadly about various threats, but would you say that cyber threats are one of the main issues we should be concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that happened with the pandemic is that we saw a massive increase in cyber threats. Certainly, phishing is one of the biggest threats that's around at the moment. So it's about making sure we've got those intelligence tools around that tell us what's happening as far as phishing is concerned. I've seen a few tools recently where you're able to actually identify where an email is coming from. And if that email is coming from Kazakhstan and you know that your employee is only in London, you have to ask the question, why is it coming from Kazakhstan, sort of thing. Not casting aspersions on Kazakhstan, but it just shows that somebody is in a different location in the world from where you would expect it to happen, sort of thing. So there are tools out there, and yeah, cyber threat is the most important. And from a 27,000 point of view, in the purest sense, it'll be cyber threat intelligence that you'll be looking at to make sure you understand what's coming and what have you got in place to mitigate that.
Yeah, so clearly there are lots of different types of threat intelligence, from high level to, I guess, non-technical information to technical details about specific attacks. So how would you define some of these types? Are there any particular categories that they fall into?
Yeah, well, we just mentioned there cyber threat intelligence, so that's one typical category. The other one might be strategic threat intelligence, and that's possibly where the pandemic one fits into quite nicely. How is the board of directors using threat intelligence to understand the vulnerabilities from a cyber attack or from any other sort of source that's going to impact their business? And this might actually form part of your SWOT and PESTLE analysis, because you might sort of pick up some ideas in there that you suddenly say, you know what, we need to do some cyber or some threat intelligence around those threats and those weaknesses to make sure that they don't come and hit us in the future. And there might be some tactical intelligence you have, and that's where you're gathering data from different organisations such as the National Cyber Security Centre or PwC or Deloitte. They're people that are skilled in gathering this sort of information, and they can pass that information on to you in their sort of annual reports. And from those annual reports, you can start to build the shape of your threat intelligence for the next year to follow.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Steve. Lovely. So there's some of the types of threat intelligence. So what does threat intelligence actually do? What does it provide for an organisation?
Well, I think when we look at what it does, we need to first ask ourselves, what are we actually doing? So we've got to make sure that our threat intelligence is relevant. It's actually providing us information that we really need. It's in context with the business, and the information we get out of it can be actioned. Because if we don't get that right, we're just going to be gathering lots of detail that could be just white noise and could just almost be meaningless. So what do we do with threat intelligence? Well, we need to decide, first of all, what it is we want to gather. Once we gather that information, we can analyse that information to determine what improvements need to be done. And it might be identifying certain vulnerabilities in the organisation that need to be plugged with better tools, that sort of thing. Yeah, so when we look at threat intelligence and what it does, we can sort of look at being a lot more proactive in understanding the world around us, understanding those threats that are coming to hit us. And we could look at some things in the organisation where there may be some strange logins into the business. There might be sort of unusual privileged activities within our systems. It could lead to a large number of requests for the same file. They may seem on their own to be quite innocent, but once you've built up the intelligence, you build up a bigger picture of what's going on, then you understand there's a threat against you. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to gather data to get a better picture and a bigger picture of what's happening around us.
So ultimately making an organisation more resilient.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm just thinking, actually, obviously this would feed into business continuity planning as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In fact, this should go hand in hand with business continuity, because some of the stuff you get out of your threat intelligence might inform how business continuity considers the impact on information security, because it could be through business continuity that you open up vulnerabilities in your information security systems, therefore become a target for any cyber attacks, that sort of thing. So business continuity should always be working in conjunction with information security in all its activities. They shouldn't be separate by any means.
Okay, so earlier on, Steve, you touched on tools. So in terms of threat intelligence tools, what are the typical types of tools that organisations could be considering?
Yeah, most typical tool is the SIEM that we often hear mentioned, which is a security information and event management tool. This is a tool that can help you gather information on any unusual behaviour and suspicious traffic that's happening in your business. There are many of these tools on the market, and you just need to find the one that's most appropriate for you as a business. There's no one size fits all. It's really just understanding what do you want and go and buy the appropriate tool. If you're a large organisation, you might invest in a CSOC, which is a Cyber Security Operations Centre. This is very important for big organisations because you then gather a group of experts together in a part of your business, and they can monitor any security threats that are coming in. Their whole job is to do threat intelligence and understand what's happening out there and be your eyes and ears as to what the threats are coming at you. So look at that sort of thing. Really, information existing or emerging threats should always be collected and analysed to make sure that you've got all the protection in place that you need to prevent any harm being caused to your organisation. And that's exactly what a CSOC does for you.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Steve. So we've got the SIEM that you mentioned, and then CSOC, which I think was Cyber Security Operations Centres for larger organisations as well. So 2 key types of tools there. Okay, great. So what sort of threat intelligent activities could a company do, and how could they actually use this information to, in terms of from an analysis perspective, to then feed back into continual improvement?
Right. Well, first of all, an organisation could set about setting some objectives around threat intelligence. What is it you want to collect, and how often do you want to collect it, and what do you hope to gain from it? And identify ways of vetting and selecting both internal and external information to make sure you don't get bombarded with all that white noise. There's a lot of white noise out there, and it could just sort of all come at you, and then you miss the detail of what should be picked out from that. So you collect that information from selected sources. Don't try and collect it from every single source, because you'll just spend all your time just collecting data. Just select some useful sources. I like the National Cyber Security Centre because it's one that's used by many people. In Australia, they've got a similar one, which is the Australian Cyber Security Centre. And that doesn't stop you, if you're in the UK, logging into the Australian Cyber Security Centre, because you might get some threat intelligence that they've picked up on that we've not yet seen in the UK. So always think about that sort of thing. There are different ones for different countries. Make sure the information you get, you can translate it into appropriate information, and make sure it's information that can be understood by other people. You might need to present it in a slightly better way. Once you've done this, you're then in a position to perhaps go away and analyse that information. What's it telling you as an organisation? Is it identifying new risks to the business? Does it mean you've got to go back to your risk assessment that you originally set up for 27001 and change some of those risk scores? Because don't forget, when we first did our risk assessment, it may have been just best guess to get the results there. Some of it may have been informed, but a lot of it is subjective. So from threat intelligence, you're actually making it much more objective in the scoring.
I'm just thinking it's also going to be making it more dynamic as well, isn't it? So quite often I think with management systems like ISO 27001, you do your risk assessment, you've got your risk register, and some businesses might not go back to that for another year when it comes to, I don't know, say management review. But by proactively, looking at, the types of threats, using that data and putting it to good use, it makes that whole process of your risk assessment so much more dynamic.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. No, in fact, that's a very good point, because one of the things I think people are missing with 27,000 is that there is a requirement to go back and do your risk assessment at planned intervals. So it's no longer just reviewing your risk assessment, it's actually redoing it. Because the risk assessment you did, that say in 2020, is going to be completely different from the one you do in 2023. And because there's going to be lots of changes within the business and lots of changes in the threats that you come across. So yeah, use all the intelligence you get from threat intelligence to inform your risk assessment and identify new vulnerabilities that need to be plugged. And it might also, again, set you off on the path of improving your internal audit process and saying, well, look, we know that there are threats around this sort of thing. How can we do some technical audits to make sure that's not happening? It might even inform your training process, because it might be that you've picked up something that's about phishing. You might then send out a very short video or presentation on phishing, just to remind people of what's out there and what they should be thinking about. I think it's important with all these standards, rather like you were suggesting there, is not to see standards as a linear thing, that one thing happens after the other, happens after the other, and so on and so forth. But there are lots of mini plan, do, check, act cycles sort of thing. And you come to threat intelligence, and that's just part of the plan, do, check, act cycle. The act of threat intelligence is acting upon it and bringing it back into your risk assessment, bringing it back into your internal audits. So, and that actually makes your system work properly as a PDCA process.
That just helps put it into context, really, doesn't it? With all other ISO standards, regardless of whether you've got 27,001 or not. That's a great way of describing that, Steve. Yeah, fantastic.
And actually, that's a good point, because this, I think, threat intelligence, this one control can be used by any organisation, irrespective of whether you've got 27 or not, because it will have information coming out of it that will impact the business in some way, shape or form.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for that overview, Steve. That's really helped to, I guess, break down what threat intelligence is and looking at different scenarios, tools, activities, how we can best use that data as well to be able to mitigate risk further within an organisation, and how that dovetails into management systems. So yeah, really appreciate that, Steve. Thanks very much for your time today.
A pleasure.
Great. Well, Steve's actually going to be joining me on the next episode of the ISO show. We're going to be covering another topic from 27002, which is web filtering, which is starting to get some questions raised about this particular topic. So Steve's going to be breaking that down for us in further detail on the next episode. But if you're wondering, okay, so how are we going to actually apply these within our organisation? We do have a programme for migration to the new 27001 standard that will be coming out shortly. And we have got some material that we're going to be transferring into the ISOlogy Hub. That's our one-stop shop, like our Netflix version of ISO standard support. So we're putting new presentations and information into that every single week. So obviously we know that 27001 hasn't been published yet, but obviously we're supporting businesses to get ready for that by applying the controls from 27002. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.